It's pre-spawn. This is the time of year that I generally catch the biggest fish that I'm going to catch the entire year. The big females are out, they're looking to eat, they're kind of in a little bit more predictable positions, and I'm gonna help you try to shortcut your process so that way when you get out on the water, you can immediately start targeting some of those bigger fish and how to do it with glide baits and big baits. So there's a couple things to really keep in mind when it comes to pre-spawn fishing. One, we gotta know where the fish are at. We gotta know where they're wintering. And two, we got to know where they're spawning, where they're going to. And once we have those two established, finding them becomes relatively simple. You just kind of draw a line from where they are to where they're going, and they're going to be somewhere within there. And we're going to talk about little things to kind of look for along the way that helps you really find those fish in that in-between section. Where are these fish at? So we're kind of looking for the wintering grounds for these fish, the place that they're spending most of their coldest period of time of the year. And this varies from lake to lake. This varies from regions of the country. We're Missouri, we're kind of at the lowest we get is that kind of low to mid 30s. And like South Texas, they never get down past low 50s. So it kind of varies based off your geographical location, but they're always going to have a place that they winter. So we're kind of looking for a little bit deeper water. They kind of want to have deep water access nearby. Now they may not be in the deep water. They may be suspended over it. They may be kind of pulled up on a point adjacent to it, but they always want to have that deep water nearby. So some of the main things we're going to look for are the main river channel. Main river channel is a great place to start. If you've got a main lake point that comes up against that main river channel, that's a fantastic place to start looking for wintering fish. There's different areas of the country, like a couple lakes around here, they'll really get in the guts and the drains of pockets, and that's where they're going to spend most of their time in the wintertime. A huge kind of red flag is like, hey, this is where they're going to be at, is look for the shad. They kind of want to be bait oriented this time of year, and they want their meal close by. So look for shad, look for deeper water access, figure out where they're at in the wintertime, and it's going to make it much easier for you finding them as we continue throughout the pre-spawn. Where are they going? So this kind of gets interesting because fish will spawn all over the place, but we're looking for the biggest concentration of fish, the biggest concentration where most of them are pulling up to spawn. So we're going to look for a lot flatter, softer pockets, softer bays. We kind of want it protected. We don't want a super soft, silty bottom where, like, if you just stick the butt of your rod down there, it just goes down 3-4 feet. That's not what we're wanting here. We're wanting a little bit firmer bottom. We're wanting flatter, and we're wanting protected. That's a textbook example of what we're looking for. A lot of the times it's in the back of a pocket. A lot of the times it's kind of on a softer bank towards the back of a pocket. But man, fish get on everything when they spawn. There's some fish, like on Fork, there's stories of giant bass spawning on the tops of trees like a squirrel. They will spawn on bluffs. They'll kind of spawn all over the place, especially those bigger ones will kind of spawn off just a little bit deeper. But as a general rule, find where the biggest concentration of spawners is going to be, and most of the time that's going to be those really soft, harder bottoms in the backs of pockets. Sometimes on TVA type locations, they'll even spawn in the main river. They'll just kind of pull up behind a bar, like a little current break on a bar, and they'll spawn up there, like behind a stump, something like that. So kind of look for a break in the current, a little bit firmer bottom, and start there, and you'll find a concentration of spawning bass. Once we have the extremes identified, we know where they are and we know where they're going, our job becomes a lot more simple. We're going to find the high percentage staging areas that are between those 2 points, and that's what we're going to start running and really focusing on. So say we've got the deep water access out here and we've got the spawning bays back here, but right here in the middle there's a secondary point with a big dock on it with brush underneath it. That's a perfect example of a staging area. But these bass can stage on anything. They're kind of sitting on a spot waiting for food to come by, just kind of working their way back to where it's all going to go down. And the weather's going to change how they act tremendously. A lot of the times they'll stage even just in the last deep water in a pocket right before they pull up to spawn. But as it gets cold outside, they'll kind of pull back a little bit more, set a little bit deeper. They may sit on the bottom. If it's bright sunny outside, they may suspend up in the first 4 or 5 feet of the water surface and just kind of hang out there. So where they set up is really kind of going to change depending on conditions, whether they're actively feeding or not. But at least you kind of can figure out, like, all right, they're pretty close to being ready to spawn, or they're a lot further back and they're sitting closer to that deeper water. But once you kind of establish where they are in that, picking out the little pieces of structure and cover between those two areas becomes a lot more simple. So if you break that, here's where they're wintering and here's where they're spawning up into thirds, you'd be like, all right, they're kind of in that first third. We can run that first third throughout the entire lake. Well, this one's a brush pile, this one's a rock pile, this one's a dock on a secondary point, but they're all kind of fitting within that little pattern there. It's something that you can run where you're not necessarily just like, oh man, they're on the back floats on secondaries. Like, it doesn't just specifically have to be that. They're kind of in this progression of the spawning cycle on this kind of look and structure. It's a high percentage spot that's in that first kind of region, and you're just kind of developing that throughout the entire spawning cycle all the way up until they're ready to go. So it's just figuring out where they are in that process. But just some general examples of different kinds of staging areas that I found them on in the past. Little subtle patches of grass, secondary points, rock piles, brush piles, stumps, rock transitions on the bank where if you've got pea gravel that transitions to big chunkier rock, they'll be right on that transition there. There's areas in the Ozarks where we will specifically target bigger black rock because it's holding heat and those fish are sucked up next to that. Docks, standing timber, guts in the pockets can even hold them where it's like they're not relating to anything at all. They're just kind of just chilling in the pocket and they'll kind of move up and down that pocket as they prepare to spawn. But those are all just little examples of stuff that I've found them on in the past that are staging areas that they can kind of be between point A and point B that you can find them on. All right, what baits are we utilizing this time of year to try to target these bigger than average fish on these staging areas? I like to go with swim baits. I like a big old glide bait. I like a big soft swim bait. We're targeting the biggest fish in the lake. We're talking 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pounders. We're talking the biggest fish. And a lot of times they are more apt to come after a really big bait. So like a clutch boss this time of year is a staple in my arsenal. It's a 9 3/4 inch bait. But it's crazy how many fish like in that 3 to 4 pound range you can still catch on it. Like, it's got a lot of drawing power, but it's not super intimidating to a good sized bass. So I'll throw it out over brush piles, kind of just twitch it over it, make it almost act like a big jerk bait. Twitch it over rock piles, throw it around those docks on those secondaries. Kind of depends on how deep those fish are setting up. On certain bodies of water, they could be up in 2-3 foot of water staging to go spawn, but in other lakes they could be all the way down in 20, 25, getting ready to move up to their spawning area. So it kind of depends based off the lakes, but most of the time I'm going to try to put a big bait in their face just because those bigger girls are more apt to come up and get it. So big glide baits like the clutch boss, the baby boss on lakes that don't necessarily have the giant fish or giant shad in them. In our neck of the woods in the Ozarks, I'll kind of tend to leave the darters at home. That's more of a post-spawn thing for me. If you're confident in a bait the size of the Eco, that'd be a great opportunity as well. Basically, just looking for something that's a little bit different than what most people are targeting these fish with, and I tend to go a little bit bigger because I'm trying to target those bigger than average fish. But how I'm going to work the glide this time of year, I'm not going to get super fast and erratic and poppy and choppy with it. I'm going to give it a lot of bumps. Slow, kick it out to one side, let it suspend for a second. Kick it out to the other side, let it suspend for a second. Give it a couple pops, let it suspend. You're just trying to slow that action down just a little bit. It seems like those fish in the pre-spawn are not going to be super hot to trot on the bait and really come after it really aggressive. They're going to be a little bit slower, a little bit more lethargic. Slow it down just a little bit, you're going to get a lot more fish to commit to that style of retreat this time of year as opposed to just really getting it humming, getting it fast. So to wrap it up and put a whole bow on this thing, there's two things we got to know this time of year. We got to know where they were and where they're going. And then after that, it gets a lot simpler because you're just looking for the high percentage spots in between that these fish can set up on. You kind of got to figure out what stage the fish are in. You got to kind of figure out where they are in that pre-spawn process. But as you figure that out, it becomes much easier to replicate it across the lake because generally in that whole region of that lake, they're going to be in relatively the same phase. They may be sitting on a brush pile in one spot, a rock pile in another spot, and on a dock in another spot. But generally they're going to be kind of in that same area preparing to spawn or not. So keep all that stuff in mind. Let me know if you have any questions, and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section below. Thanks, guys.